it was such an exciting time. I think the 80s, particularly the early 80s, gets a bit of a rum deal. It was a really vital time for pop culture and where pop met fashion, photography, video. And I wanted to write about that. It struck me there's really very little out there from that time. A lot of memoirs from the 70s, the 60s, but as yet there was very little from the early 80s.
There's a lot of people here who'd like to ask you some questions. Before I let them do that, and we're going to start with Melissa's question in just a second, I have to ask, makeup tips. I'm
pretty low.
You guys were so gorgeous.
Yeah. Well, of course, you don't have to use too much, do you? I mean, well, I grew up on glam rock. I mean, I watched, what Bowie wore when I was like 13. I mean, that was always a part of the look. I liked that androgyny in music, But yeah, I mean, it was always going to be a part of who we were. When I met Nick, I mean, obviously that was the first big connection that I made, because it was like meeting a like-minded soul, together we started this adventure together, first as fans, and then with the idea
sneaking into concerts.
Yeah. I mean, I really wanted to put that in there. I mean, for instance, that particular day, becoming a real Roxy music fan. This day that I got to chase their cars across Birmingham. I mean, so many people have been there in that way for Duran Duran. And all the time I've known, well, I did that. I can relate to that. And I like the idea of giving that away and showing, because on the one hand, you try to preserve this gravitas, but sometimes it's good to let people know that you're human, And I wanted to tell that story. But, makeup, I've never been the one to wear that much. Little smear of eyeliner and I'm good to
lip
go.
gloss.
Yeah.
Well, the way you were a Roxy Music fan, Melissa was a Duran Duran fan. Melissa, please share your story with the world.
Okay.
I'm Melissa Lawson. I'm from New York.
Hi.
This is really embarrassing because it's totally true. March 13th, 1984, you played a concert at the Harvard Civic Center in Hartford, Connecticut. I was 11, and I sent a stuffed ticker backstage with a love note and my phone number on it. After the concert, about 2 a.m., our home phone rang, and my parents answered it. And on the other end of the phone was someone who said it was you, and they invited me to your hotel room to party in Hartford. Being 11, my parents said no because they thought it would be trouble and I would be exposed to drugs and sex. And I, of course, told them that they ruined my life. So I want to know, were they right and should I forgive them?
You should have. Was that not Winnie the Pooh that was calling at the time? I think I can say, you know what, what would you like to hear?
Ever pleasing the audience.
It sounds like somebody's put that together, maybe. But you know what? Maybe it's possible. Maybe it's possible.
All right, Kristen Chiappo.
Hello,
Hi.
I'm Kirsten from New Haven, Connecticut. And I'm just wondering, there are very many detailed stories and recollections in your book about things that happened in the early years. And I know that I find myself having what I call not quite senior moments or midlife moments regarding memory. And I'm wondering if you kept journals or diaries back then that you had to refer to for any specific details while you were writing the book.
I had 1 or 2 diaries that really had very little in them. I was able to use them just to pinpoint places. First couple of years, there's almost nothing in the diaries except places. And venues, TV shows, occasionally there'd be some mention of a single coming out or something. I think the only thing that I took wholesale out of a diary was something that I'd written on New Year's Eve. I think it was 82, and it was kind of sort of introspective. I was looking back over the year and sort of looking ahead to the next year, and it was almost it was like a prayer almost that I'd written this thing, and it was quite moving when I read it, and we decided to keep the whole thing in.
You talk about your influences quite a bit and your mom.
Yeah.
You talk about your mom quite a bit.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Roxy Music, but you say you went to the school of Beatles, Bowie, and the Sex Pistols. And I was wondering what classes they taught at that university.
Oh, wow. Well, the Beatles, they teach you about, how to be a group, and how to respond to hysteria, and how to keep growing as artists, and don't get dragged down. Don't ever play to the lowest common denominator. You know, don't. I mean, they never lowered their game for the audience. Do you know what I'm saying? I think that's what's so great about their career arc. They just kept aiming higher and higher. Bowie was was a great individual. I feel he was the one. His 70s career was the one that was most interesting, at least for me. He built on the Beatles model, and he did in his sort of 10-year arc. You know what they were able to. It's always about artistic growth, I think. Really, you know, it's how do you keep growing? How do you keep adjusting? But the Sex Pistols I have to be grateful for, because the Sex Pistols said in 1977, basically, the less you know, the more you've got to say. And at that point, I really knew nothing. So that gave me an in.
Something that was specific to all of them, and Roxy Music, who we mentioned a few minutes ago, was a very, very specific aesthetic.
Yeah.
Which Duran Duran also had. I mean, on the boats with the suits.
Yeah.
I never wear a suit on a boat.
Yeah, I know. And the funny thing about that, I was thinking about that, actually. At no point, when we showed up for that Rio shoot, at no point did anybody say, are you going to wear that? Yeah, I mean, it was just a given. But there's a point in your life where the confidence is just total. And you can wear anything and get away with anything. I mean, now we would have there would be so many discussions. Really, is Simon going to wear that? And really, you think that's and it was just take them as they are,
So no focus groups. You just we're wearing the suits.
We're wearing the
no
suits.
stylists.
Away.
No stylists, really.
Yeah.
You backstage doing each other's hair?
No, not exactly. But, I mean, we had a very one of the things that I really admired in us, looking at the evidence, was how easily we adjusted to situations like when we first went to Sri Lanka, which we did because we were looking to make something that would fit into this MTV network, which was just getting going, and MTV the guys that were putting it together had confided to our managers, well, what, could you give us something with like that sort of James Bond appeal, like a travelogue, glamour? So they convinced us that we should stop off on our way to Australia for our first tour there, stop off for a few days in Sri Lanka. And I mean, it was like, Sri Lanka, what are we going to do in Sri Lanka? We're going to make some videos. We're going to make a video for Hungry Like the Wolf and Say a Prayer. And I don't know, when we got there and the cameras started rolling, we looked like a band. We'd adjusted our image. We were very, very good at doing that. We didn't talk about it a lot. It just sort of happened. Everybody had a great instinct for what the right look was for the moment.
How old were you when you were in Sri Lanka?
In Sri Lanka, 20. I was almost 22. So I was still 21. Nick was still 19.
And here we are in Sri Lanka. Let's hear Rachel Coy's question.
Hi, Rachel, Jersey City.
Hey, Rachel.
Do you think shows such as American Idol and X Factor have had a positive or negative effect on the music industry?
Well, I'd have to say they have a negative effect, quite honestly. And I would just look at the evidence, and I would, I don't know. I've never been a fan of talent shows, particularly. And I also, I like a little bit more creativity. I'm more interested in songwriting. I'm more interested in idiosyncrasy, something that somebody has that is different to everybody else, and it's a little too cookie cutter for me. I've got nothing against talent shows, but those talent shows in particular take up a lot of room in the media. A lot of space when when space could be going to more interesting artists. But the interesting artists will survive.
How do you think Duran Duran would have done in front of Simon Cowell?
Oh, never. Never in a million years would I have wanted to go on a show like that. It's not made for bands like Duran Duran. It's like. I mean, I don't want to put it down because it has its audience, but it's a different deal. I'm not quite sure what it is actually.
Can we back up a little bit, because I want you had so many, Kevin named a few of your influences, but I want to talk a little bit more about your mom and dad. Mm-hmm. Your dad, the car executive, your mom who didn't drive, and and how much radio and the music that was coming out, even in their years, played such an important part of who you were, as well as the church.
Right.
Because you were doing that daily.
Okay. Right. Well, the church was crucial, and the church, I mean, Catholic. I was raised Catholic. I was taken to church almost every day, except Saturdays. You know, then the church was the local grocery market. But yeah, I mean, before I started school, my mother took me to church every day, and I didn't really know what it was, but I liked the music, you know, and you know, even thinking about that, and thinking about those church hymns and why they still resonate with me today, and. But you know, these are songs that have to appeal to 5-year-olds and 95-year-olds. So you know, they've got to be good, and for them to survive, they've got to have, you know, even if you don't take anything away from the words, melodically, structurally, they're pretty strong. My mother was a great fan of pop. She was another stage door Johnny. You know, she got autographs. I think Harry James, and you know, she liked the big bands from the 40s and the 50s. And she liked the personalities behind music. Obviously the Beatles, we talked about them. I mean, they were a massive influence. They were particularly influential. They were particularly profound in my home because my mother was from Liverpool and she'd moved to Birmingham when she was young. So they really spoke to her. So, you know, I mean, I heard the radio before. That would be what I would wake up to in the morning, would be, and in 1963, chances are it was going to be a Beatles song that you were going to hear.
Yeah. In fact, getting tired of them, huh? Mike Rhodes, you have a question, very much about music.
My name is Mike Rhodes. I'm also from Jersey City.
All right.
And my question is, A View to a Kill was recently rated the #1 James Bond theme. Is there any Bond theme you actually like better?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't deign to compare our song with Diamonds Are Forever, for instance. I think that's just an awesome song, and Goldfinger also. I mean, I'm such a huge fan. I mean, I really appreciate, you know, that we get those kinds of accolades with our contribution. But for me, you know, I mean, you can never I can never. I mean, you only live twice. I love. I mean. There's so many.
Have you heard Adele's?
I have, and I think
throwback, isn't it?
I think it's great.
It is.
I mean, I was so happy to love it, you know, and I thought, God, they did it perfectly. You know, it's just yes, it's a throwback, and she just delivers it. It's like Shirley Bassey. It has that kind of gravitas, but a sense of fun and a bit of a kick to it. It's great.
Once again, this is Sirius XM Book Radio. It's an Author Confidential with John Taylor of Duran Duran.
The book is In the Pleasure Groove. I want to talk about your family just a little bit more. You've got a great line in the book. You're out on tour. You're 20 years old. You're in Sri Lanka. You come home and your dad's pounding on the door going, "You're not on tour. Turn it down."
Well,
what a weird dichotomous way to live.
That was one of the most extraordinary things that I learned from doing the research from the book, and this was 1982. And the year began with us in the studio in London making Rio. We finished it, I think, March, and we headed off for Australia, as I mentioned, stopping off in Sri Lanka. Our first trip to Australia was madness. It was like Beatlemania. And we went from there to Japan, and it was the same thing there, our first time there. We came to the States. All that summer, we crisscrossed the country 3 times, I think. And then we went back to the UK and we did a sort of triumphant end of year tour there. And we finished with a run in our hometown, and we were staying at the Holiday Inn. And then it was like, and we checked out of the Holiday Inn. No, this was in Birmingham. And then well, where did I go then? Where did I go? Oh my God, I was still living at my parents. You know, and I've gone and I've had that experience. And I'm still living with Mom and Dad. And that was, I mean, I could have written a book just about that. I mean, it didn't last very long. But I felt I got a couple of, I mean, I put that bit in about, you know, I had to introduce to my mother the idea of the Do Not Disturb sign, you know, which you know, I brought from my hotel experiences, which said, you know, do not disturb.